Let's say you've gone out and purchased a new coil-top stove recently, kind of like the one we have right here. The control panel and even the oven work just like any other one, but the coils up here look differently and they definitely act differently. Why are they different and why won't they heat up just like your old stove? Let's answer that question today. Since 2018, manufacturers have been putting a different type of coil in your stove that looks and acts way differently. Unlike the old one, these central plates do two things. The first thing they do is prevent your coil from turning on and heating by itself, accidentally causing issues. The other thing that these types of coils do is that they limit the amount of heat that your pot or pan gets. This is where a lot of people get angry. Why in the world would the manufacturers do that? Are they trying to make stoves more energy efficient? Is this some sort of big government conspiracy? Well, not really. There is a big government conspiracy out there, and thank God I'm wearing my InfoWars tinfoil hat, which is why I really wear this Maytag hat, but it has nothing to do with the government, at least when it comes to electric stoves. No, in fact, a company called the Underwriters Laboratory, or UL, is responsible for all of these changes. You may have heard of this company sometimes when you look at products and they mention that they are UL listed. And surprisingly enough, they didn't do this to save trees. They did it to save houses. Why would you want to save a house? Well, grease. Yes, the big UL corporate conspiracy involves nothing other than just John Travolta and Olivia Newton-John. No, really. Grease fires for stoves are actually horrible, and they happen more frequently than you think. Cooking oil and grease account for half of all kitchen fires, and they account for 1 out of every 5 fatalities in the United States that involve a house fire. This means they're more likely than your refrigerator to explode or having a dryer at a laundromat catch on fire and take the whole building down. That means that this little piece of crap limits your temperatures to 450 degrees. Now, depending on the situation, that could be a very good thing or a very bad thing. But how do these little elements work? I don't know. So let's actually go ahead and take it apart right now.
Fortunately, these coils do remove quite easily from the stove, just like the old style will. On the rear side of the heater coil is this protective grill that needs to be unprotected. It took a little bit of time to remove it with this Dremel, but these 10 snips ended up finishing the job. Now with the grill removed, this is what you're going to find inside under the cover. Electrical wires running from the resistive coils into and out of a sensor directly placed in the middle of the moving plate. I'm not sure if you can easily see it here, but there's also metal tabs around the edges providing a connection once the plate is depressed. Now that we've removed the wires, here's a clearer picture of that sensor on the back side. What does it look like? Well, here's a sensor from a dryer and they look almost identical. That means the sensor basically is going to kill the heat connection to the element when the sensor gets around 440 to 445 degrees Fahrenheit.
Now, before we do this next thing, let's show you a black screen that reminds you that this video is for entertainment purposes only and does not constitute professional sound advice. So remember, I'm just a rotund repairman in a Maytag hat. Well, with that out of the way, what can you do about the potential heating problem? Well, I happen to have a pre-band coil here. Incidentally, it has the same identical spade shape as the one on this one. And it turns out that appliance companies happen to be notoriously cheap, and they may have the identical same spade connectors in them, depending on the model, like this SY58 here. Let's see what happens. Gonna turn it on really, really high. It's getting a little bit hot, like my wife. And now we have a pre-band coil that has been installed. Now, despite this running and catching on really hot and warm, and I don't know how long I'm going to be able to stand, you really don't want to do this, even though I showed you for entertainment purposes, legal department. I don't suggest doing this. Why? Because grease fires are actually really dangerous. And if you don't believe me, we actually had a grease fire with one of the stoves we sold a few years back. We sold it to a different company that was selling appliances near us. And about 3 or 4 months later, we got a really scared phone call from them. And there was a house fire that involved the stove. The owner of the business went out, looked at the stove and looked at what happened. Turned out it was a grease fire. the person that owned the home was using the stove improperly and it had the pre-banned coils on it. Now, my business was safe because it ended up being wholly the fault of the homeowner, but if we had maybe gone into one of these machines, taken the proper coils out and put the old ones in, it could have been a major insurance problem. So if you do this, this is Exhibit A in why you could lose your house and not get your insurance money. So having said that, what should you actually do if you want your stove to heat and work properly with these new coils? Well, the first thing that you want to do is use a pan with a flat bottom that will engage the sensor as much as humanly possible. It will heat the coils faster for a smoother heat. The next thing that you want to do is use a lid. You want to cover the pot or pan that you have to allow it to heat faster and better. So let's try an experiment here. I have here a Chintzy Walmart pan. It was kind of weird though when I went to Walmart and asked them where I could find some pot, because the sales associate said, "Hey man, I can't do that till I get off work." And I had no clue what he was saying. Oh, he was talking about left-handed cigarettes. But anyway, we're going to take two pots that are identical. We're going to go ahead and put both of them onto the coils, new and old, and we're going to run some tests. So let's go ahead and get these filled up with water and let's explain the experiment.
To test the heating ability of the new and old style coils, here's our test. We're going to fill up each pot with 1 gallon of cold tap water. Once we have each pot filled, we're going to have the stove run at maximum heat for about 6 minutes and gauge the heating results. In addition to a good old thermal gun, I'm going to set my FLIR camera up above the pots to see what happens in infrared too. Let's run the units at full blast and see how the coils operate. On the infrared, it doesn't take long to see that my setup isn't perfectly equipped to do this. The areas around the pots are quickly throwing off the temperature scale, and within about 2 minutes of running, the scale's already maxed out at about 302 degrees Fahrenheit. Darn. But the stove is going to continue to operate, and you can see both pots of water continue to warm up with no lids compared to the maxed out elements at the end of the 5-minute test period. Back to the regular camera, the old coil shows a super healthy red glow, and while I was watching this test near the end, immediately behind the cameras, I noticed something happening right at the end of these tests. But let's get to the temperatures of the water first. About 119 to 120 degrees for the newfangled coil, and only about 115 degrees for the old style coil. The new one actually seemed to run better, hotter. But here's what happened though. I heard and saw the coil cut off right about the 5-minute mark. You can see on the temperature gun the coil hit around 430 to 440 degrees. The old coil set identically looks to have gotten about 100 degrees hotter in this side-by-side test with the thermal gun. I find this very fascinating, so let's do a longer in-depth test with putting the lids on the stock pots. In this test, we're going to let the pots cool down, empty the water, and then go ahead and run another 1 gallon of water each cold tap in both units, and let's set the highest temperature setting, which is 9, for a grand total of 20 minutes. I'm going to print out a chart and document the water temperature every 2 minutes on each coil to see how they work in and after the 5-minute mark too. Now starting out with the first 4 minutes, the new style coils actually outperformed the old style coils just like the first test that we did, so it's been duplicated. It stayed ahead about 12 degrees Fahrenheit at this moment. But after that mark, here's where we started to see the test begin to change. By about the 8-minute mark, the results have essentially reversed. The old style coil takes the lead at 128 to 121 degrees Fahrenheit, and from there it just never lets up. By 18 minutes in, the stock pot with the old coil has a roiling boil and it maxes out at 202 degrees Fahrenheit, while the new coil is still working to catch up. Switching to the temperature gain by interval, you can see where the coil switched on and off, even by using this chart showing how well the safety system works. This test also gives us a baseline for future units, such as surface mount and induction units as well, so we can kind of gauge how effective they are at boiling a pot of water and how fast they heat up.
Clearly the one that was limited was about 20 degrees cooler than our pre-banned coil. And this shouldn't be surprising necessarily. We saw the coil cut off multiple times, but in fairness, it tends to heat up just as well as the pre-band coil until you get to that heating point to prevent it from running too hot. But what do you do to get around this if you want both safety and to be able to heat up more? And the answer to that, I think, is not a coil-top stove. The one thing that I saw a lot of in this was that there was just a ton of heat escaping on the IR camera around the rings of the coils. And one thing that I'm concerned about, and we're going to show on camera right now, is what does it look like heat-wise underneath? I think it's probable that these coils tend to reflect a lot of heat elsewhere other than these pots. I personally use a glass top stove that has similar rate limits to it, and I have no problem boiling water or cooking things too fast. Sometimes maybe my wife burns things with a glass top stove because it heats so fast, and that is because of how they are designed. Here you go. Here's your differences between a surface and your standard coil element. You can see around the edges of the surface element, it is sealed with something to block the heat and direct it only upwards. I think that this gives you a big advantage, and even though people may want coil top stoves a lot, I tend to favor surface elements personally, and unfortunately it seems like your freedom of choice on these has been underwritten by a laboratory. One thing I do want to do soon is test this stove with the coils the way they are against a surface element stove and an induction element stove to see exactly what kind of efficiencies we look at these. We have a sponsor, Impava, who has given us some cooktops to test against these, and I'm really excited for that, so make sure to watch in the near future. The videos are going to pop up here and down here with stove content when it comes out, which will be out in a few weeks. I hope you enjoy this video. Bye.